Hi, I'm Karen Van Dieven with the ReadTech marketing team. Welcome. And I would like to thank everyone for joining our webinar today on Health Canada's new XML Product Monograph for drug information, what you need to know and do. We'll be discussing Health Canada's new XML Product Monograph Process, their timing and requirements, and what you can be doing now and in the future to prepare. But before we get started with the presentation, let me quickly go over just a few logistical items. The presentation today is going to be recorded. The slides and the video link will be distributed to all registrants by email after the event. So anything that you see today, you will be receiving these slides. There will be a Q&A opportunity at the end of the presentation. And if you look on your panel there, you'll see a section called questions. And all you need to do is just input your question there and send it on. And we will try to get to your question at the end of the presentation. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties as far as hearing or viewing the webinar, please just send a message in that same area. I'd like to introduce our speakers for today's discussion. We have Gary Sainer, who is Senior Manager of Information Solutions with ReadTech's Life Sciences Group. Gary is a subject matter expert on drug labeling, FDA regulations, and other regulatory agencies. He has over 35 years experience in the areas of software development, process management, and data administration, and a deep understanding of regulations, business requirements, and systems in the life sciences industry. We also have John Nolan, who is our Associate Product Manager here at ReadTech Life Sciences and Structured Product Labeling with that team. And he'll be available at the end of the presentation to answer any of your questions during the Q&A session. Since 2017, both John and Gary have been working with Health Canada and a couple of pharmaceutical manufacturers in the Health Canada XML Product Monograph pilot, establishing ReadTech solutions supporting the XML Product Monograph preparation, submission, and management. So we have some great experience there to discuss with you all the situation there in Health Canada. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to our presenter, Gary Sainer. Gary?
Thank you, Karen. Welcome everyone to the webinar today. We'll focus in on Health Canada. We have a number of topics that we want to go over. We have some in the audience that may be new to XML and SPL, perhaps not had the opportunity to have any work with the FDA SPL for labeling, for drug labeling. So we're going to take a little bit, not much time, but just kind of review a little bit of the basics about what this XML and SPL is all about. Then we'll move into the Health Canada program that has been started for XML product monographs and do a little bit of a background, get the context in place, and then spend a good portion of the time talking about the timing for the submissions of the product monographs as they launch this new initiative and some of the requirements for prescription drug products. Right now, the scope does not include over-the-counter, by the way. We'll get into some of those details. At the end of the presentation, I'd like to share a little bit about the service that we have available to support XML product monographs. And then the balance of the time would be focusing in on the Q&A. We also know that in the audience that maybe some of you have not had a chance to be connected with ReadTech, and we just do a quick introduction here about the company that John and I work for, and Karen as well, and a quick synopsis of ReadTech. these materials will be supplied to you folks so you can read a little bit more detail. So I'll just kind of do a flyby real quickly here. But we are providing best-in-class information-based solutions and services to the life sciences industry. There's a number of years that the company has been operating since 1961 there. And we're a provider of regulatory product data management and submission solutions to over 1,000 medical device and pharmaceutical clients. There's a number of associations that and industry groups that we are connected with. And if you have interest there, we're glad to talk a little bit further. As to the life sciences group, we focus in on the pharmaceutical. There's actually a parallel business unit that focuses on medical devices as well. But today, obviously, we're working around the topic of pharmaceuticals. And we have been working with SPL since the inception in the FDA's use of SPL for listing and labeling, going back 15 years. And we do keep a finger on the pulse of that industry. And as regulations change, we are members of various trade groups and participate in pilots as necessary. Excuse me. We've also submitted a significant number of SPL files to the FDA. They obviously get posted on the National Library of Medicine Daily Med, and created a number of those and a significant number of customers in our customer base, and we're always grateful for that particular success in those areas. And we have a desire and mission to be a trusted team partner, so virtually a team member right down the hall. And nowadays, with a lot more business being conducted online, that's a little bit more of a reality. But we have been working with over 1,000 of those manufacturers. In some cases, they have very small inventory portfolio, and yet at the other end of the spectrum is very large. So if you have any other questions about ReTech, we can follow up at another time. But I want to move on, and let's get a little bit of a summary and do an overview of what XML is all about and set the groundwork for our discussion today. XML is an acronym for Extensible Markup Language, and that is simply a set of rules about how you encode a document, and it's able to support a lot of different types of features of a document. So things that you would normally see in a Word document, headings, paragraphs, and text, and data values, and images, all can be handled by XML. And one of the main advantages of XML is that it's able to support both human readable uses and also machine readable uses. Excuse me a second. All right. So the other the other noteworthy thing about XML is that there are two views of XML. And we'll be taking a look at that a little bit later. There's a raw XML view, some people refer to as the raw text. But that allows an author or a machine to go through and find information very quickly. It's tagged, and so processing and sorting and searching is greatly facilitated by tagging the values in a document. The other view is the rendered view. So the tag view, as we'll take a look at a little bit later, is not very conducive to getting a quick read. It needs to be rendered by way of a browser such as Internet Explorer. And that is based on something called a style sheet, which provides the the instructions of how that data is presented, whether it's a color or the font size and various other elements of the text is all controlled by a style sheet. There is a very broad use of XML, and SPL, structured product labeling, is a very small set of all XML that is available in industry. Structured product labeling refers to the standard that Health Level 7 has put together a set of rules and regulations called a schema. And that particular schema was adopted very early by the FDA back in 2005 timeframe to transfer data about drug products and facilities. And then more recently, more relevant to this particular discussion today, Health Canada also has made use of that standard. And what we'll see is that this foundation of the schema, this basic standard, can be used in many different ways. By way of example, we'll take a look at some of the types of documents that Health Canada is using it for, and FDA will take a look at those. But with particular set of implementation guides and control vocabulary and style sheet that I mentioned earlier, you can use the basic foundation and create various types of documents. First example is with FDA guidance going way back to early 2000s. They use it for a National Drug Code labeler code request, an NDC labeler code request. So that was a particular use. It has some instructions about how you create it, and it looks a little bit different than another use for establishment registration. So that captures facility information. There's a third major area of FDA use for label listing. I think off the top of my head, I remember way over like 61 or so different document types that the FDA has used. And defined by way of guidances, all based on the very same schema. And in fact, Health Canada uses that very same baseline schema, that standard, but they have their own set of implementation guides about what values need to flow into the various fields, what the structure is and how they fit together. And Health Canada also created their own style sheet. So what you see from a Health Canada product is significantly different than what you would see from a FDA style sheet. So that XML product monograph in the upper right there is generated with the very same underlying schema or standard that FDA uses, but the guidances are generating a different document and present different type of content. So with that said, there's a lot more to talk about there, but we're going to move on. Hopefully that's a little bit of a background for you folks, and talk about Health Canada's initiative, referred to as the XML Product Monograph, and we'll take a look at how they've been preparing some of that and just kind of define it. You may have heard this particular project referred to as SPM, or Structured Product Monograph, and it's the very same as XML Product Monograph. It's one project, but there was a name change a couple months ago. So the current name, and going forward, as we understand it, would be XML Product Monograph. And it's the Health Canada's initiative to capture prescription drug product information in that SPL format based on the Health Canada guidelines terminology. And what they hope to do is improve data accessibility, quality, and so on, and switch over to some international standards, and again, facilitate the machine use of this particular content that they capture inside a product monograph, and allow it to be used much easier for downstream uses. The contents of that XML Product Monograph are in part, very much as you have been working with product monographs in the past, there's that part 1, 2, and 3 for health professionals and scientific info and consumer info. That all that is embedded in the XML product monograph, and you'll be recognizing that information very easily. What is new is some of the metadata surrounding that document. So there's information about the organization, your company. There's information about the drug product, and we'll take a look at that in a little bit more detail. And there's version and identification of the actual document itself. That's probably going to be the real challenge, is collecting some of this product metadata, and we'll take a look at that a little bit later. And just a heads up, I think the other challenge would be actually getting the XML generated. So those would be the two challenges: collecting product metadata. The other information about the product is well documented, and that does not need to change. So if you're especially using a product monograph 2016 template, then that flows into this XML product monograph very nicely. Health Canada has identified human pharmaceuticals, radiopharmaceutical, and biologic drugs as those items that are in scope, and they would be making use of the ECTD. So the XML product monograph actually is submitted inside a package in an ECTD submission. And again, the focus is only on 2016 templates. So if you've been using one of the earlier ones, 2004 or earlier product monograph templates, that's not in scope. And only the 2016 product monographs are being attacked first, and there may be some activity later on, but only the 2016 template are in scope. Now, just as important, what is out of scope? The over-the-counter non-prescription drugs. So there is certainly a huge number of drug products on the market, and Health Canada has not included those in scope as of yet. So there might be a change in the future. I have not heard any plans. There's nothing that is in the background, on the back burner. But who knows what is going on inside some of the discussions inside Health Canada. But nothing publicly has been shared about over-the-counter. In the same regard to self-care products, natural health products, and medical devices, or even those food and veterinary drugs. So they're all out of scope. And again, as mentioned, 2004 and earlier templates are not in scope either. There are some similarities between the Health Canada activity and what FDA has done since 2005 with their drug SPLs. We already talked about both use the same SPL schema. Coincidentally, both use the very same electronic submission gateway. So when you're submitting to Health Canada, you put HC in there as the target recipient rather than one of the FDA targets. What is unique, though, is that XML product monograph uses Health Canada authored implementation guides. Their validation rules are also dedicated. Their style sheet was written for their particular application. They have a different set of control vocabularies. And again, the content is different. So you see these parts 1, 2, 3. In the FDA, you have various labeling sections, 1 to 17, and with various topics. So the content is, at a 20,000 foot level, it's kind of similar, but the way it's implemented, the way it's written up, the way it's organized, the sections are quite different. And Health Canada looked very closely at the FDA as a guideline, but they did not copy the implementation that FDA has. So one of the early questions that we get a lot is, can I use my FDA SPL for my Health Canada? And the answer is no. There's not that level of sharing going on. And then the other difference, certainly those that have been working with Health Canada know that because of the language, English and French versions both need to be created. So if we look back in time, this activity has been running since 2017. So there was a testing phase that accelerated in late 2018 and 2019. We here at RETEC did actually participate in that, and they did some early evaluations. And then with that initial pilot activity, they started to release versions of documentation and guidance. And that has finalized over these years, especially late half of 2019. And you see in the 2020 January timeframe, the notice that the product monograph implementation plans were rolled out. And that is what is really driving this discussion, because they have arrived at the point where they feel good about opening this up for a broader group. There was very limited activity and scope inside the testing phase. And now they're about ready to expand it, and we'll get into the timing here in our next section. So let's move over to the section that talks about some of the timing. I believe there's a timing chart coming up and some of the requirements. Yes. So this is the result of that notice that came out in January. The notice refers to basically 3 phases. One phase starting April 1st. I know that's April Fool's Day. I hope they're not, kidding. But anyway, April 1 through July 31 is a period of time referred to as that phase 1. And this is where, if you're interested in participating in this limited production, these are real live submissions, you would need to put a request in to Health Canada to participate. And I think they're going to kind of get a scope on that, would start with the huge amount of inventory, maybe limit the actual volume and the number. But they do want to exercise real production and the submission activity through that phase, and they'll let that run probably through the rest of the summer and into the fall. And then the next time frame is not a particular date, but kind of a range. They talk about the fall of this year, 2020, to start phase 2. And depending on how their first phase goes and whether or not they need to make any major changes or not, it could start very early in that fall time period. This phase 2 is a voluntary production submission phase, and it's open to the industry. And again, if you qualify, you don't have that OTC and you have 2016 template, you would be able to generate XML product monographs and submit and start to get engaged with this particular initiative as the time goes on. The noteworthy is, though, once you do switch to XML product monograph, then all later submissions and updates through the ECTD would need to stay in that format. So, you probably don't want to cut over with your full inventory at once. You want to target a couple and then see how it goes and learn from that. But it is, once you switch for a particular ECTD, then it needs to stay in that XML product monograph. The third phase that the notice identified was this mandatory. So this was quite significant. They had not talked about a mandatory cutover much more earlier than the January, but this document came out and now it's in print. And they're charging full ahead in Health Canada to move to a mandatory production submissions. And this would be any new or changed product monograph. Again, 2016 format only, in spring of 2021. So roughly a year from now, any new products that come out or changes, you would need to have the capability to generate XML product monographs. The fourth phase I put on here as just kind of a placeholder. There's no date, there's no plan for all those legacy product monographs that use the 2004 and earlier. But I think Health Canada is going to wait and see to get a feel for how this conversion is taking place, this migration to the new format. And there may be some recommendation to convert your legacy product monograph to XML. And, we'll wait and see, whether or not that ever turns out to be a mandate or not. But just keep that in mind, that there may be a point in time where you need to cut over your full inventory. All right, so let's take a look at, we've talked a lot about XML product monographs, and here's a real live example. This is actually generated by Health Canada. On the left, you see some raw text. Those people that are doing authoring are involved in that and probably recognize some of the things going on there. But normally, a user would not need to get involved in that detail. You should have a good tool or some other type of a solution, a vendor or something to allow you to concentrate on manufacturing drugs and not getting involved in necessarily the real details of creating XML. But noteworthy for this particular slide is on the right-hand side, when you render that information in with a style sheet, so like a browser is able to open up that file, and lo and behold, you see some things that look very familiar to you. So this part one, this health professional section, that's the beginning of part 1, 2, and 3. There is a section here, recent major changes. There is a title page in the top. There's also not shown, but also a table of contents that allow you to migrate very quickly to various sections. And then what is new of significance is the product metadata. So I noted this earlier, where a number of data values are collected and presented in a tabular format. If you're at all familiar with the FDA SPL, this will look very familiar. The layout is very close to the FDA's presentation of the metadata in this table format. There are a number of attributes or product metadata elements, if you will, about that particular product. Many of these, if not all these, are maintained in the product monograph, but they're not, they're held in text, in narrative form. In addition to that narrative, the XML also has provision to capture those values in structured fields with various tags around it. And this is the structure in the tagging identification that supports very fast computer analysis and searching and sorting. So there's a number of fields that you would need to generate depending on your number of active ingredients or number of active ingredients and inactives. It could be quite more, but as a baseline, you'll need to think about 65 data elements need to be addressed. On the left, there is information about the company, the marketing authorization holder. So information is captured on that particular topic. If this product is imported or distributed, then there's appropriate fields for that, and a lot of information about the product and packaging and regulatory status and so on. This slide shows some of the activities that need to be addressed and how the data would flow from your site on the left-hand side as a manufacturer over to Health Canada. And so the task is to make the data flow from point A to B, left to right. Some of these tasks have been in place for years, and so you're already familiar with authoring a pristine product monograph. Various teams are obviously involved in that, regulatory and other legal and production and so on. So nothing new there. So generating that source product monograph is something that you're already familiar with, as well as the translation activity. So with the English and French being required, the solutions already in place for that particular activity, and making sure that you have both languages available. What is new is being able to generate this XML product monograph document and being able to build that. So you never had to do that for this particular application to Health Canada. You might have some experience doing that for FDA, and obviously you want to look at what you have in place there, see if it can be expanded for Health Canada, or do you have to research a new type of a solution? And there's various things that come into play when you start to come up with some kind of a solution to build this product monograph. And then this ECTD tool, again, nothing new there. You've been using that for your marketing application submissions. There is a particular LEAF module 1.3.1 location for this particular XML document and corresponding images to be transferred over to Health Canada. And there's obviously the review of that package, changes based on that review, so you'd have to go through this process again second time, and then upon that final generating both a French and English version and sending that in as a final ECTD. That eventually becomes published, and that document sits out on the Drug and Health Product Register. And I can't emphasize enough this new XML build test. This is a brand new task. It has a lot of requirements surrounding it. For those that were working in the FDA space, there was an online authoring tool available. Health Canada has elected not to provide an online authoring tool. And again, FDA has a validator tool available online, but Health Canada is not generating that. And that leaves you with your own resources, or partnering up with a tool vendor or some other service vendor to help assist you in building that XML product monograph. And that's the major challenge, as I see it, going forward, is coming up with a good solution there. Karen, I believe we have some poll questions. So with that, I'm going to take a little break, and why don't you run poll questions 1, 2, and 3, and have the audience participate and report some of their activities and what where they are in this particular pathway for understanding product monographs.
Okay, excuse me. Thank you, Gary. Before I show the first question, I want to mention that we are getting questions in for Gary and John, and thanks very much. Please go ahead, and you don't have to wait to the end. Plug in your questions there in that question panel, and we'll address those at the end of the presentation. So I have 3 questions right now that we would like to poll the group. The first is what type of ECTD solution do you have? And if I can just ask you each to take a minute there and put in your response. I'll wait until we got everybody here and then we'll move on to the next. We still have some responses coming in, so we'll just let them finish up. And if you haven't answered already, if you would go ahead so we can move on to the second question. I still see people are answering. I'll give everyone a few more minutes. Or a minute. Okay, we're going to be closing this one down and I'll be going on to the next question. Does your ECTD solution have plans to create XML PM for Health Canada? If you could just answer yes, no, you don't know.
Looks like the votes are coming in faster on this one, Karen.
Yeah, I guess they had to
It's
consider.
a little bit
I guess
easier question. You have hard
Yeah.
questions in the beginning there.
Well, I know. Well, you threw a lot of information out there. They're still kind of reeling about what do I need to do. Okay, I think we got most people there. I'm going to close this one out and we'll move on to the next. Are you considering switching your ECTD solution type or vendor? There, I think we got people's mindset now. They're really answering the question quickly here.
Yeah, this question may not have been posed yet with their current supplier, or
Right.
plan to look for other solutions.
Okay, I think we got everyone there. I'm going to close this down, and those are the three questions. I appreciate everyone for your answers, and I'm going to give it back to Gary here. Thanks.
Thanks, Karen, and thanks to the audience for participating. That provides really good information. I think what we'll do now is change the topic a little bit. We have gone over review of the Health Canada requirements and their timing and what needs to be done. I want to share a little bit about the XML Product Monograph service that RETEC offers, and so that you can make some intelligent decisions about whether that would fit into your plans or not. So we've been working, as I had mentioned early on at the beginning of this conversation, with FDA SPL. So there's a lot of expertise in-house. The team that John works with and others in the operations group have seen a lot of different scenarios over the course of years, a lot of high volume, so a lot of experience in that. And that, coupled with our experience of working with Health Canada on their pilot and building samples, we actually partnered with two major pharmaceutical companies in building samples for them. And in the course of that, we did gain a good working relationship with the product manager at Health Canada. So I found him always readily available, great resource. If you have questions, feel free to contact Health Canada. They seem to be very responsive and very much interested in having this roll out with success. So we do offer a Health Canada XML Product Monograph service. That service is an outsourced model where you give us raw information, pristine English and French, along with any supporting images, and we collect the data. We create the XML Product Monograph XML file and report that back to you. There's a lot of supporting value around that activity. It's not too much unlike what we do for the FDA, but that will allow you to participate in the voluntary phase in this production pilot. So if you're so interested in doing that, please connect up with us, and we'll help support building those XML files. And then as you look forward roughly a year, where the mandatory timelines start to come into play, certainly would like to have further discussions about how we might be able to help you. And this is where we position ourselves in that data flow that we were talking about earlier. So everything that we talked about earlier is in place, but with the layering of ReTech onto your team, we're able to help this particular activity of building the XML product monograph. So copies of those source documents, the pristine English and French, along with the data. We do very stringent data validation on the data set, go through and build and check that particular content. There's something called parsing against schema to make sure that the XML actually meets all the other requirements. Health Canada has actually put a number of data validation rules in place, and we would observe those and check those, and we store those, all those versions, and make those available, and then report those back to you, produce those XML documents back to you along with the report. So that XML product monograph then is supplied in partnership with ReTech. We help you build that, and then that becomes a particular file that you would attach to a leaf on your eCTD and submit that off to the Health Canada for review. And we understand the back and forth and negotiation. In parallel, there would be a Word document, which is similar protocol in working with the FDA, actually, to make sure that they feel, the agency feels comfortable with the claims and what you have in place on the product monograph. And then this whole process would be repeated again for that final approved version in, let's say, the primary language for discussion. Let's say it would be English. And then in parallel, there's this discussion about a second language. And again, in our example, use French. So advise you to start that translation early, get that bulk translation done, so that you can meet the 20-day turnaround period to have both French and English reported after the approval date. So I see at least probably 3 documents: the initial draft English flowing to Health Canada, and then the final English with its changes, and then in parallel the French version. And as necessary, you know, there's more iterations there, but at a minimum, I would expect 3 passes through this particular process. So I know there's maybe a lot more questions about how that fits into your model, and we can talk further. There's some well, there's a phone number and email information there that you can take a look at in the materials, so we can explore how this would work at your particular site. Karen, I think we have one more poll. Let's knock that out first, and then we'll kind of wrap this discussion up for today and get to the Q&A.
Okay, Gary, here is our last question. Which answer best describes your expected approach to preparing the XML product monograph for Health Canada? If you just take a minute and give us your answer, we'd appreciate it. We just got a few more to go here.
So it'll be interesting to see how this works out for those companies that market both in the FDA arena and also in Health Canada area.
Oh boy, yeah.
How those particular solutions expand.
All right. I appreciate everyone. Thanks very much for your input there. Gary?
Okay, well, there's a couple slides here at the end that I want to make you aware of. As far as resources, we have some information on our website. There's some blogs and other types of information. So right off the homepage, if you find that Knowledge Center on the top and then drill down into the drug and biologic product submissions, you'll find some documents and blogs about Health Canada. Obviously, there's the other LinkedIn and Twitter type of accounts that you can connect with us. And again, provided in the materials, the next step would be, pursue where you stand. If you want to be very aggressive and start launching and get your feet wet with the voluntary period, would definitely be happy to support you along those lines. And even if you are thinking more long range and want to explore how you're going to put a solution together when this becomes mandatory, 12 months sounds like a long time, but obviously you want something in place long before then. But here's phone number and email where you can reach us. With that, I'm going to ask John. I think you've been in the background, hopefully looking over some of those questions that came in, and between you and I, maybe we can field some of those at this point in time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Gary. I think you did a very good job here presenting a lot of this information that's maybe new to a lot of the people in attendance today. I am hearing some background noise. If you can mute Gary, or if you can mute Karen on your end, please. It sounds like we're getting an echo. Thank you. So yeah, thank you everybody for attending today. It's great to have you. We have some questions here that I would help facilitate and address for you with the assistance of Gary. So we have about a little more than 10 minutes left. So I'm just going to get started here. So one of the first questions that came up is, let's see here. Is any of the timeline affected by COVID? I know this is a big topic right now with the pandemic going on. I'm sure Health Canada is very busy addressing this situation, but I have not seen any communication personally from Health Canada that the pilot is going to be affected with what's going on. So I would not put this on hold. I'd recommend getting started, putting a plan in place as soon as possible for your company. If we do hear any more information on this, we will definitely send out communication to everybody that was in attendance today, as well as any of our customers. Another question we have here is, do you have to submit in both English and French? I do have some information I can share with you all on this. So in short, the question is yes. The final approved product monograph is required in both English and French. Health Canada has provided controlled vocabularies in both French and English for this pilot testing phase. So what Health Canada is saying is that sponsors can choose to submit in French or English as their primary language. So they'll consider this the first language submission. So with that in mind, there is some things that are expected from Health Canada. So with your initial submission, whatever you decide to submitting, if it's going to be French or if it's going to be English, again, that's your first language. There's three things that you have to send over to them. So first and foremost would be your product monograph XML in the clean format. You'd also have to provide a Word version of that product monograph in your first language. And if you have any annotations or anything such as that, that also has to be sent over in a Word format in that first language. So after you make your first language submission, it's expected within 20 days of acceptance into review that the product monograph word clean version of your second language gets submitted. And then expected within 20 days of NOC, the XML clean English and XML clean French is required to be submitted. So that was a lot of information. Hopefully you all received this and this has been recorded, but you can reach out to us and we can provide more details on the French and English submissions if you like. Another question here is, will the XML PM be visible to the public similar to the FDA/NIH Daily Med drug listings? I have heard from Craig Anderson, the project manager of this pilot at Health Canada, that they do have plans to do something similar to Daily Med. We really don't know at this point exactly what that's going to be. Their greater focus has been getting this pilot up and running to prepare for the mandated submissions, which will hopefully come about next year if these first two pilot phases are successful. Let's see here. So some other questions here. Gary, here's a question for you if you'd like to answer. Can I reuse my US FDA SPL for Health Canada XML PM? And Gary, keep in mind you are on mute.
Oh, yeah, thanks. This is probably a little bit better. Yeah, it's very possible you have a product that's marketed in US as well as Canada. You have obviously going through two different labeling activities, and you'll find that the narrative has the same basic content in it. You know, maybe you're using the very same strength and dosage forms and so on. So there is a relationship between the FDA and Health Canada. That said, the actual narrative, the actual text that is recorded, that reflects the exact content of what you have in place now for the product monograph. So that's different. So you cannot use the very same narrative for Health Canada. What you might be able to do is reference the metadata and help drive you filling those particular data fields for the list of active ingredients and so on. Just a word of caution, though, you want to make sure that you do, in fact, have the very same formula and packaging and identification of product and so on. Names might actually be different for a brand name and so on, but I would think it would be helpful as a reference. I would not blindly try to copy the metadata from the US and use it for Health Canada. So I think bottom line is it's a good reference and can help you along the way, but don't think that you're able to reuse it intact.
Thank you, Gary. It looks like that we have a lot of questions that pertain to what is in scope. And, you know, instead of going through each one of those individually one by one, I'll try and clear this up and relay to you what Health Canada has put into their notice. So just to clarify, you know, from April 1st, 2020 to July 31st, 2020, Health Canada will accept XML product monographs as by request basis only. So again, these are product monographs that are in 2016 format. This includes and only includes new drug submissions, NDS, where a Canadian reference product files in 26 format, all abbreviated new drug submissions, that's ANDSs, and supplements to abbreviated new drug submissions, SANDSs, can also file in XML format. Supplements to new drug submissions, SNDS, where changes are proposed to format or content of the product monograph. And lastly, keep in mind that all subsequent submissions of a product already filed in the XML format will be required to continue filing in an XML format. So once you start that file it in the XML, you can't go back and file on paper again. You got to continuously, as you need to make updates, file in that XML format.
So John, a little follow-up on that. Would we expect then that a lot of the product monographs, as they are currently written, if they adhere to the letter of the law in the 2016 template, would be able to meet the XML validation for that particular same content? Or, and that's what I believe is the case, but as we know, that sometimes there was some variances against the actual template that may have been approved. So can you comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing to keep in mind is that XML and SPL is very limited. It's great for aggregating your information into sections to make the information more easily readable for the public, physicians, etc. It also makes the information more searchable for downstream uses, such as marketing materials and so forth. A lot of the stuff gets posted in different repositories here on the FDA US side. So one of the common questions that we've always seen on the FDA US side is, my typeset document or my SPL document does not 100% reflect what I'm seeing in the XML document. And a lot of that's due to limitations of XML. Commonly what you see is that when you have tables that have footnotes, you know, a lot of those footnotes have to follow a very specific format due to these XML limitations. When you have special characters in there, they have to be entered a very special way by entering a Unicode. You know, similar to what FDA has said in the past, is that the most important thing really is that the content is there. It's not going to be guaranteed that it's going to be a one-to-one, you know, perfect representation of your typeset document due to those limitations. So, you know, content's the bigger thing to keep in mind. You shouldn't really worry too much about styling, such as fonts and font colors, etc., that you may have in your typeset documents. Health Canada does have a lot of resources out there for the various 2016 formats and the templates. So does that really answer your question there, Gary?
Yeah, it does, and I would expect a similar type of environment and a little bit of a variation between what the XML renders as and what you would see in a Word document. So yeah, thanks.
You're welcome. So it looks like we're in our final minute here. We're probably less than a minute now. It looks like we still have some outstanding questions there. I just want to let everybody know, if we did not answer your question today, we do get a report after this webinar of all those outstanding questions, and either myself or another member of our team will reach out to you and address those questions. You can always contact us as well. You will be getting a copy of these slides as well as the recording. But with that said, I want to thank everybody again, and I'll pass this back to Karen.
Thank you. Thanks, John. As John mentioned, I will just reiterate again that you will be receiving a copy of this presentation with the slides and the audio. That will be coming out the 1st of next week on Monday. And they also included in that, and if Gary would just go up one slide there, move up a couple slides, there will be an appendix. And in that appendix, there is going to be some great reference information, some resources, all that will be linked and clickable for you to be able to view. So additional information that we were not able to go over today. Also, there is a glossary of terms. There's a lot of acronyms that were thrown around, as typical when we're talking about the FDA and in the pharma industry. So we have all the acronyms there in the back too. So as you go through the presentation, you'll be able to refer to that information. We really appreciate everyone joining us today. Thank you very much. Thank you, John. Thank you, Gary. And everyone have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.